What's good, everybody? My name is Alckemy, and today we are going to be reviewing this bad boy. Thank you to Sensel for giving me a review copy. Before we do that though, if this is your first time to the channel and you like the content, please consider dropping a subscription or comment or tell me what you like or don't like about the video so that maybe I can improve. With all that out of the way, let's get to the unboxing. So we're going to talk about the build quality of this, the software here in just a second, and then also the integration with Bitwig Studio because that's what I use. If you don't know what MPE is, that stands for multi-polyphonic expression, which just allows you a very fine amount of control with just a single finger. For example, you've got velocity, you've got pressure, you've got timbre, you've got slide, and then you've got the initial pitch as well. And with your powers combined, you are Captain MPE, and man, you can get some really cool stuff out of it, like I'll show you here in a second. There are other MPE devices out there, but the modularity behind this of being able to just kind of take something like this, swap it on the fly, it's pretty darn cool. And not only that, but without having to have the software open or do anything else, as soon as you switch this out, it just works. So that's something that is going to be really cool that we're going to be taking a look at here in just a second. So let's talk about the build quality. The device itself is actually pretty sturdy, and I'm not going to try to bend this or break this, but it is pretty solid in that, right? It's mostly aluminum and plastic, I feel, and the black thing has a very deep and sensitive sensor that allows all of the cool stuff to happen. Now, one thing that I want to mention before I go on is that while you do have custom plates that you can pretty much order from their website and you can actually make your own, if you have a smart pen, then you can actually use this as a drawing tablet and you can also use it as a mouse. They also provide you with a keyboard if that's something that you want to try to do and use this as like an external keyboard or something. Because this is Bluetooth, that means that once it's hooked up to your computer, then it pretty much works flawlessly. The latency is very little, in case if you're wondering. However, I usually just kind of leave things hooked up, and it kind of has a cool little light indicator right here to kind of tell you what's going on. So the only qualms that I have really with this is the fact that this is micro USB, and this isn't really a complaint, but maybe a wish list on a future device or a future upgrade that I would like these to actually be RGB for some reason, because I like RGB. Or maybe a battery indicator. That would be kind of cool too. Aside from that, if you actually take a look at some of the rubber, I think the coolest thing about this is that if you turn this around, you can see that these are color coded. And I think that's kind of what gives it the, I guess, recognition about what kind of faceplate you're using. The rubber itself is soft, but it's not squishy. I can't really compare what it's like. You kind of have to get a feel for it, but it does feel very nice to the touch, and it does feel like it's very sturdy whenever you hit it. Even though these are attached by magnets, they don't slide around, as you can see, even if I'm kind of dragging this along this way. So the magnets on these will keep this faceplate on. You're not going to really have to worry about them kind of pulling off unless if you do it like really hard. But you don't really want to do that. Take care of your stuff, right? Other than that, the quality is pretty darn strong. So let's go ahead and hop into the DAW and I'll show you how to set this stuff up. Okay guys, before we get started, I'm going to help you navigate how to get your software and stuff set up, not only with Bitwig, but just in general. If you go to the shop sense over here, then you can actually find the actual pricing over here, and you can see all the different kind of overlays and stuff that they have to offer. Kind of as I mentioned before, one cool thing is that they have the innovators overlay, which means that you can kind of create like a custom mapping and stuff, and then they can actually send it to you. And then also, I didn't get my hands on it. I might actually go and buy this at some point later in time, but I'm curious to see how the video editing kind of works out, because that could be a great workflow tool for Final Cut editing. So coming back up here, what you want to do is we're going to go to Get Started, and you're going to go into the Downloads tab. Now, as you can see, I'm working on a Mac, so one important thing to know is that you want to download not only the Sensel app right here, but you also want to download the driver, because it's going to need to kind of do that to talk to both. So it's a little bit confusing to find the Bitwig Sensel script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in Sensel Morph Bitwig script, and then it will be right here. And what you will do is don't worry about the reviews. There's only 2 reviews on here right now, so if you guys end up purchasing this and you like this, then be sure to leave them a positive review. I will at some point later in time, because this actually works better than somebody complaining about no Linux version. So aside from that, all you do is you go to add to cart, and then you check out. It doesn't kind of require you to put any other information in, and once you have that downloaded, you want to make sure to remember where that is saved, because what we're going to do from there is install everything. And once you have the app, it'll open up and kind of look like this in particular. Now, by default, you will have these depending on what faceplate you kind of upload, and you can just go to Add Overlay and it will kind of tell you what to kind of figure out in that way. However, what you want to do is find your corresponding thing. We're going to go over here and go to Import Map. And what this will do is it'll allow you to open up your browser, and then you can find the script stuff that you have. So for me, I found, the Bitwig things or whatever that's located in my documents, and then it kind of uploaded all this stuff for me. Once you kind of have this interface in particular, it's pretty cool because you can remap anything, and there's a lot of different depth that you can adjust as well. For example, if I were to play something on this right now, I have it set to a very high sensitivity because I have the keyboard layout for bass in mind. And so what's really important to note is that if you click on this right here, then you can see that the pitch bend means that you only have to move a very small amount in order to get the maximum pitch bend with that, right? So for some people that want to play more keys, they might want to set it to a higher depth amount, so that way, or even turn the pitch off for that matter. So that way you can adjust the sensitivity towards your needs. Now, this is going to get into one of the quirky things that I had to find a workaround, because even though the Bitwig script works for 99% of the things, the one thing that I couldn't get to work by default was setting the recording up with this to toggle that. And so what I did was I came in here and I went to File, went to Settings, into Shortcuts, and I found Record, and I set that to K. And then all I had to do was come into the Sensel Morph and then assign this to K. And now whenever we come back into this, cancel, I'll go right here and I'll hit that record button, which is right here, and it works. So it's cool that you can kind of remap this to be whatever it is that you want to in that nature, right? Aside from this too, like let's say you want to change all of the keys, all you have to do is hit Command A, and then you can kind of adjust things from there. You can also hit Commands and then highlight multiple things in case if you want to do different key ranges and have different sensitivity per group with this. And the same thing applies to all these other things, including the drum pad, the music production, the Buchla Thunder, and all that. We'll talk about these here in just a second, but I kind of just wanted to focus on the expressive controls that you have with the piano for now. And whenever you are ready to remap something in that way, then you want to make sure to go to Send to Morph, and you'll see that whenever you're ready to make those changes, this little thing will flash, and then it will be updated whenever it's ready to go. So now that we have something like that, I have an MPE preset pulled up from Polygrid, and we can kind of play some stuff. And you can kind of see that it's morphing and stuff over time, and that's because by nature, if I hit this down here, I have a different controls that categorize MPE in the first place. So the first thing that I have is if I hit a note, we've got velocity. That's just the initial hit. If I keep holding this down, you'll see that this has pressure involved. And that kind of FM tone that you hear is what's kind of happening from pushing that harder. And then you'll see that as I slide this up, it'll open up the filter. If I want to change the pitch, then I can do that. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that true MPE supports the ability to do this with multiple fingers or multiple touches. So for example, and by default, you want to just be aware that if you're trying to do this with multiple touch with a VST that you use the expression controls on Bitwig, it will allow you to do it with a single note, not every single note. So just kind of keep that in mind, okay? Which basically means that you can do like multi-monophonic expression as opposed to that. But that has nothing to do with Sensel. That's purely a Bitwig thing. Just because we're covering it, I want you to be informed. With all that stuff being said, there allows a huge degree of sensitivity that you can not only adjust again within the app itself, but also within kind of like whatever faceplate you have put onto that. So for this in particular, like I said before, I have these XY controls and the pitch bend and stuff, and then you can also have the ability to set it to something like absolute XY. You can make it so that the LED pops on whenever you hit a note, which is pretty useful for me, and then also recenter the CC control so that way it will kind of, whenever you push it, it will go back to 0, which is pretty useful in that way. And then you can also adjust the pressure, or you can set this up to control a specific CC on here, and it just works really well once everything is kind of set up, and I really like that aspect. Now, one thing that I want to show you guys as well is the actual visualizer to demonstrate the aspects of MPE. So if I go and hit a note, you will start to see just a very slight, I'm barely pushing this, and you can see that the harder that I push this, all of these different degrees of pressure kind of constitute in this, and that's a pretty wide range. You've also got the slide, as you can see, and that just is kind of like an XY pad that also has depth in that way. So think about it like a Z plane or something, which is kind of cool. One thing that you also want to be mindful of is that if you have the visualizer up, this won't trigger the MIDI. So if like something stops working all of a sudden, that's because you have the visualizer up. So just keep that in mind as well. Here's the other really cool thing about this. I like the keys, but now it's time for me to do something different. So I'm going to pull this off. Come on over here. Let that slide in. You can kind of see that it kind of fits itself in because of the magnets. And now suddenly I've got the, this working on its own, and I don't have to change anything within the software. I usually leave the software open because I like to make changes and stuff, but depending on what I'm doing. But even still, without having to click on a different preset or whatever, I'm kind of it's already ready to go. And so if I were to do something like pull up the drum machine on here or so, like maybe the drum and bass kit that's really basic, I will also pull up the macros here. You can see that whenever I start playing something, then I'm able to also adjust the macros that are lined up. So in order to get the macros working with this specifically within Bitwig, you also want to make sure that whatever it is that you want to macro, that you actually assign to an actual device within Bitwig. Because if you have something like faceplant or whatever and you have macros on here but they're not set up to here, it's not going to work. So you want to make sure to kind of map that to whatever macro that you want to do, and then once that's on there, you'll see that it'll kind of pick it up in that way, just so that way you're aware. So going back to the drums and stuff, I really like this because there's a lot of different things that you can do, not just with drum playing itself, but also having the ability to change the macros live and just the responsiveness and stuff overall. So if I was just going to play like an easy drum beat, this not only reads something that is velocity, but it also has the same MPE controls, which I'll show you in just a second, but just as a quick demonstration for the pads. Pretty nice, and they're pretty responsive in that way. And they also have quite a big degree of depth within the velocity that you can kind of mess with as well. So and like I said before, it's incredibly responsive in that way. But this isn't even the coolest thing that you can do with these. If you have something interesting, for example, like this, which is a drum machine that I have, this is 3 different soundscapes that I have set up, and the timbre and the pressure are set up to change different parameters of this. So the pressure is going to change the speed of which these granular synths are working. So if you look over here, if I hit this harder, it's going to push harder in that way. But I'm also using these these Y controls, the slide controls, to change the pitch of this. I'm going to play that just a little bit louder. So this is really cool because imagine having a bunch of these set up. I've only got 3 for now, but if I play all of these together, I can get a really cool expressive like soundscape from this. So okay, so now that I have something like this, then what I can do is I can set this up as a macro right here for the mix, and I can kind of mess with this in a way to kind of create more space or make it more dry. So Sorry, that's a lot of fun to mess with, and I hope that this is something that will inspire you guys if you have something like this as well. So having the ability to control the MPE functionality with these pads is something that I think is really, really fun and really enjoyable in that way. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the other faceplates now as well. The next one that we have is the drum kit section, and this one is kind of interesting because if you're kind of used to maybe seeing an actual drum kit or so, then this is kind of a little bit more rudimentary in that way, but it's still kind of fun. We're going to pull up Superior Drummer, and even though Superior Drummer doesn't support MPE functionality, this kind of is cool because you can kind of see that there are these little grooves here in this way that will actually separate the samples on which this is divided. So obviously the kick is usually in the center, and then we've got a stick hit right here, or rim shot, then we've got a snare, some hats, and then a snare roll. It sounds more like that's pretty cool though, because like if this is something that you're used to doing, or maybe you just want to try a different approach, or maybe you want bigger pads within all that, then you can kind of, you know, jam out in that way. I mean, I'm not the best drummer, especially with this particular interface and stuff, but I do think that if you have something like Superior Drummer or Addictive Drums or just any drum kit, really, this can kind of be an interesting thing for you to try. And once the MPE is set up and stuff, then you can use these two controls to change the octave. And there's only a certain amount of controls that you have in between that, but it kind of gives you a nice range to kind of be able to play and mess with in between. Last but not least, let's go ahead and pop this off. And I don't know if you realize that or not, but again, I kind of just picked it up. Is we're going to switch over to the Buchla Thunder. And this one is kind of interesting, and I wasn't really sure what to think of it at first, but what I've kind of found myself getting into is using this or thinking of this as a different approach to playing this as a musical instrument. For example, if you just look at it, like, I don't know, it kind of looks like a little bird, like with a tail and then like wide wings and stuff. But if we actually go back into the software and we take a look at what's happening with the Thunder pad, you can kind of see that the note mapping between all of this is a little bit strange. So you've got G1, E1, and C1 right here. Then these two are different octaves of C, and these are matching in different octaves, but they go up as you get closer. So, oh, sorry, let's go ahead and go into a different patch over here with Equator 2, and then I'll pull this back up. So you can kind of see that this is mapped in a particular way for specific scales. And that's kind of how I would particularly use this in general, is maybe like I like to do things mostly in F. So I would set this preset to something in F, and then I can kind of play different keys and chords in that way. If you look up here, you've got different sets from this that have different quote unquote like I'd say scale mappings, but you can set it to be whatever it is that you want in that way. And I'll just leave it here for now. And then whenever you're ready to change it again, you can go and send it to the Morph via this button. But it's kind of cool because you can end up getting just like some different melodies that you wouldn't normally get from playing a regular piano or so. Some cool like horror pad stuff right there. I feel like this is like mostly like C major or so. Actually, yeah, this is a C major thing, so that's kind of why this sounds a little bit happier. But even in that case, you know, if we take a look at some of these other things, maybe like that one is mostly XY controls. This one is something different. So let's take a look at that and send it to the Morph, and now you'll see that this is going to play different notes. Give it a second to kind of load up. Very nice. Very nice. So it's a lot of fun to play with, and by default these two are usually turned off, but maybe if you wanted this to be like your kick and snare or something, or maybe if you wanted to have this control, then you like set this with your thumbs to control something else, like maybe a filter, then you can kind of have an extra depth of expression with that. But that's kind of what I think the Buchla was made for in particular. And while I'm not the best at this because I'm not quite used to it or whatever, and I'm also not the best keyboardist in general, you can still get some interesting things in that way. And kind of like what I said before, all of these different pads, even though they're different shapes and sizes and stuff, still support the full MPE functionality. Okay, I wasn't going to let myself go out without playing something cool, so I'm glad that I was able to figure something out pretty quickly. So yeah, that pretty much does it for the Sensel stuff, for the software and hardware integration and all that. And I have to say, like, so far I'm pretty impressed with just the ability and the different means and different approaches to this, and that's why I like that. I have to be honest, like, before I reached out to Sensel for this, which, by the way, they did not pay me for this video. I actually reached out to them for the review copies, so you'll hear me say it a few times, but thank you, Sensel, for sending me one of these. But part of the appeal for this was understanding that with sound design, if you have the ability to control things via MPE, then it changes the way that you do sound design in that way. And so one last thing that I want to show you is kind of just a reiteration, in case if this is the only video that you've seen, of being able to control something really cool like a bass patch. And so I'm going to go ahead and flip over to this bass right here. I've got a video up on this bass about how to kind of approach tunes like this, but for this in particular, just switch that on. Let that load up. What I have set up here is actually something that's really interesting. And again, I talked about this before. Even though Faceplant doesn't quite support MPE, we can still do really cool MME. And so what I have with this is a particular bass. And if I play this vanilla, then it's just going to be the actual bass on its own. But if I hit the pressure, it's going to activate the neural processing that I've done on this via the multipass here, which you can kind of see here in this way. You can see that this will turn the mix up on all these as I push the key harder. Pretty cool. And then as I slide this up, it's actually going to activate the generator aspect of this, which is kind of just like complete chaos via something from multipass. I've done a lot of videos on that. So check this out. And then, of course, I also have the settings to where I can do pitch bending with this. So by allowing myself to go and slide across all these things and whatnot, I can get some really cool and interesting basses from this. That was really cool at the end. So the reason why this is significant in particular is because I can use one patch, quote unquote, one patch, to do 3 different things that I would normally spend time doing separately. And with if it weren't for the Sensel controller or having the ability to have a competent MPE controller in the first place, I never would have thought of this. And I also had some really cool ideas thrown at me while I was kind of demoing this on stream and stuff. So shout out to Data Broth as well and some of the other guys that were in there. But how cool is that to be able to have so much control just with a single finger? And that, my friends, is why MPE might be right for you. Even if you're not a crazy expressive player, just one finger can do all of these different controls in one way. It's pretty exciting. So let's go ahead and finish up with my final thoughts and we'll move back to the camera. So to kind of summarize, I think that this controller is actually pretty darn cool. And for the price point of $250 for the base model, and then you can also have different bundle options as well, I think that there's quite a lot of flexibility that you can have for this multi-polyphonic device. Now, why would you get something like this over something like Rolly Seaboard? Because I think that aside from the broken one that I have, the Rolly Seaboard is great too. I think that they're kind of catered towards different kinds of people that like to do different kinds of performances, right? It's like the difference between somebody who likes to do drumming and finger drumming. It just kind of is like a different form of expression. For somebody that's really expressive by playing fully loaded instruments, I could see them wanting to invest in a much more expensive Rolly Seaboard to be able to play keys in depth. And while we do have a really cool keyboard right here to allow us to play basic keys, I don't expect anybody to be playing, you know, a full Beethoven symphony on that. Now, while Rolly also offers the idea of expansion, this kind of allows you to be able to take one device and have something that's incredibly portable that all fits conveniently within this bag here, which also thank you again, Sensel, for sending me the bag as well, into a completely portable device. And this thing doesn't weigh nearly as much as a Rolly Seaboard as well, and it's a lot easier to move, in my opinion. With all that being said, I think that if you are in the market for a multi-polyphonic expressive controller, then this is a great choice because, for one, the price point is just right. I would say that the modularity that you have between what your needs are fit a wide range of things. Like I said before too, you can also create your own and then have them like printed out for you, which is pretty awesome. And then you can also go further in depth and do really awesome remapping via the software within it. The only two complaints that I really have with this in particular is that getting this set up and to kind of figure out those things with the button mappings and all that is it is a little bit tedious, but it's not, you know, unbearable by all means. It's not necessarily a complaint, but for a future update, I would like them to upgrade to USB-C or so. The battery life on this is pretty good. Through the time that I've used it, it has not ran out on me. It hasn't disconnected, so the connectivity behind it has been pretty solid. And overall, I think it's a pretty good product. So let me know what you guys think. Is this something that you guys have already? Is it something that you've been interested in buying? It's definitely a lot cheaper option than something like Osmos or something, right? But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thanks again so much, Sensel, for sending me this. And I think that this definitely deserves a thumbs up from me. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you like the content, and I'll see you in the next one.